It is time once again for a concert review. I've seen quite a few concerts this year and last year. I don't talk about all of them here, but once in a while I think one will come along that people want to hear about. And I went and saw Elvis Costello last night in Royal Oak, Michigan at the Royal Oak Music Theater. And this is, I believe, the fifth time I've gone to see him live in my lifetime. And for those of you who don't know, Elvis Costello is a musician who started putting out records in the 1970s. And he's put out quite a few since then. But I am a big fan of his early stuff. In fact, a lot of people who like him will say that the early stuff is the best. And quite frankly, I'd kind of become disenchanted with him as an artist in later years because I didn't like the music he was putting out. And so it got to the point where I actually got up and walked out of one of his concerts. And so we'll get there because last night was a great show. So it's come full circle for me. So those of you who don't know, Elvis Costello, he's 71 years old right now. But he put on a great show, and his voice is great. And one of the cool things about music is that singers' voices often don't age the way the rest of you does. And so you can see a singer who 40, 50 years later sounds the same vocally as he did back in the day. So first of all, My Aim Is True was his first album, came out in 1977. This Year's Model, 1978. Armed Forces, 1979. Get Happy, 1980. And then a couple other albums that were in there that, not part of the important set that I think of. And then Imperial Bedroom came out in 1982. That album is one of my favorite albums of all time. And there's a song off that album I was hoping he'd play last night, and he did. And in fact, I like that album so much, I've got a signed copy of the LP framed on my living room wall. Okay, that's how much I like that album. But we'll get there in a second. For those of you who don't know, Elvis did not get a lot of airplay in America. His music kind of fell between the cracks. It was considered new wave, but it wasn't rock and roll enough to make it on the most rock and roll stations. But it was too rockish to get onto non-rock and roll stations. And so he did not have a lot of hits in America as far as singles go, especially not off those early years. Later on, the song Every Day I Write the Book or the song Veronica got some airplay. But those, to me, like I said, are later and not part of his core gospel albums, which, like I said, is those five I mentioned earlier. And so the interesting thing is that I started following him in the 1970s, bought all his records I talked about, and then went and saw him play in 1981. And it was shortly after the album Get Happy had come out. And I liked that album a lot also. But I saw him in 1981. Then I saw him in 1982. And that was when he was supporting the album Imperial Bedroom, which was, I believe, his masterpiece. And so those two concerts, 81 and 82, were just amazing shows. One was at Pine Knob, one was at Meadowbrook, both great venues to see concerts. And I remember just thinking what great concerts those were. And then in the 1980s, he did an unusual tour where he went around and he brought out on stage this big spinning wheel like the Wheel of Fortune. And it had songs on it from his catalog. And he would invite people up on stage to spin the wheel, and wherever it landed, he'd play that song. Called the Spinning Songbook Tour. And I saw him in Ann Arbor, Michigan during that tour. And like I said, it's like around 1986-ish. And it's kind of funny because he has all these songs on there, and he's not going to get to them all because there's too many songs on the spinning wheel. And he invited a woman up on stage and goes to the microphone, "Hey, what's your name?" And then he goes, "Where are you from?" And she goes, Chelsea. And the audience goes insane because one of the songs on the wheel is "I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea." And he just looks at her and he goes, "Should I just play your song?" And she goes, "Yes." He played "I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea." So he's got a great sense of humor, but he's also got this monstrous catalog of stuff because of so many albums he's put out. But the problem I had with him is he put out the album Spike in 1989. And that's the song, the album that's got Veronica on it, which I don't really care for. And I went and saw him when he was supporting that tour. And he came out and started doing nothing but new stuff. And he got 7 or 8 songs into the set. And I'm like, I'm not even familiar with this music. And then he played one of his old songs and he changed it up so much it sounded new and weird. And I hate to admit this, I got up and walked out. Literally walked out of the show. I was so annoyed and frustrated that this guy who was my hero, who's got this huge catalog of music, literally is choosing not to play any of it. Now, I understand that later on he played some of the songs, but not many of them. And what's weird about it is you have to understand, it's the only concert, I think, in my life I've ever walked out of. And the guy was my hero before that. And I'd seen him play at those other concerts, which I consider to be some of the greatest shows I've ever seen. To go from that to me walking out, I was talking to a good friend of mine who I discovered was an Elvis Costello fan, and I hadn't known that. We were discussing shows we'd seen. And I said, did you see him on the Spike tour? And he goes, yeah, it wasn't that good. And I said, yeah, I got up and walked out. That was my quick review of that show. I'm not going to stick around for the rest of this. I want to beat the traffic. And so I wasn't sure what to expect now, but when they announced this tour, they actually said he's going to play his old stuff. And so apparently I wasn't the only person who thought that he should play the old stuff. Okay? So I will tell you the one thing that's important to understand. And music is like this too. I've mentioned this before. How you can often have a song or an album or an artist that reminds you of a particular moment in your life or time in your life. And Imperial Bedroom came out in 1982 when I lived in Bad Axe, Michigan. And I got that album, and I remember bringing it into the radio station, and I put it on the turntable in the studio, the production studio, and I made a tape of it, a cassette tape of it. And that cassette tape was in my car, and I listened to that tape. I'll bet you I listened to that tape thousands of times. The tape was in my car. I'd get in my car to drive someplace, and I was playing that song. Driving home, driving back up, driving around during the week, everywhere. I wore that tape out. I listened to that album thousands of times off that tape, just that tape in my car. So that album became something I was so intimately familiar with, and I loved that album so much. But I also remember it as being something that at the time in my life when I was moved to Bad Axe, my first time away from home, didn't have a lot of friends up there, fish out of water, trust me, that album became the soundtrack. But it wasn't just the soundtrack of that time period, but it was also something that I look back on fondly as helping me get through a time where I was otherwise, like I said, fish out of water kind of thing. So that album does that for me. So I was hoping he'd do songs off that album. There's a song on that album called Man Out of Time. And I like that song a lot. It's my favorite song on the album. If people ask me what's your favorite Elvis Costello song, I'll tell them Man Out of Time. A lot of people don't like it because it's longer. It's got kind of an unusual intro. And it's not part of that canon, the section where I think most of the good music came from. It's in the last of the 5 albums I'm referring to, Imperial Bedroom. But that's my favorite song. So I've mentioned before, there's a website called setlist.fm. It's crowdsourced. People can go in there, and if they see a show, they can put down what songs an artist played. So you can, if you're going to see a show next week, look your artist up and find out what they played last week. And a lot of artists don't change their set lists much from day to day. However, somebody like Elvis Costello does. So the good news is that I went in and I was looking at the set list for the shows approaching this show. And I saw that he played Man Out of Time pretty much in about half the shows. He was not playing it every show. And I'm like, there's a chance he's not going to play it. But if he plays it, I'd like him to play it because it would be the first time I have an opportunity to see him play that song. I don't remember if he played it back in 1982, although he probably did. But I was hoping he'd play it. So he came out. And another thing to mention here is that he has mentioned in his materials that Charlie Sexton is touring with him. And Charlie Sexton is a guitar player. Some people will remember him as a one-hit wonder because he had a song in America called Beats So Lonely. Beats So Lonely. It came out in 1985. What was remarkable about that song was he recorded it when he was 16. And they put out an album and a video. Videos all over MTV. The song was a top 20 song, and his album was a top 20 album. And so he had an amazing amount of success at 16 and 17, and then he kind of like disappeared. And I hadn't heard of him since then. And so I looked him up, and it turns out he's been doing tours with other people, playing guitar. and also producing music for other people. But he's also, for instance, he toured with David Bowie. I'm like, what? And then he also toured with Bob Dylan. So I thought he was the warm-up act. And at 8 o'clock last night, the house lights go down. People start walking on stage. People start going crazy. It's Elvis Costello and his band. Charlie Sexton is merely a member of his touring band right now. And so the original lineup that Elvis Costello had, not in his first album, but his second, third, fourth, and so on albums, was called Elvis Costello and the Attractions. And in that band, a keyboard player named Steve Naive, Pete Thomas, Bruce Thomas, and then Elvis played guitar. Well, Bruce Thomas, the bass player, has left, but Pete Thomas, the drummer, and Steve Naive, the keyboard player, were back. And then Charlie Sexton is playing guitar. And so they came out and they opened with Mystery Dance. And that's a song off of a very early album. Very early. Number 2 song, Watching the Detectives. Again, an older song. This Year's Girl, off of This Year's Model. Miracle Man, Less Than Zero. And for those of you who don't know this, Elvis Costello famously got in trouble because he went out on Saturday Night Live back in the 1970s to play 2 songs live. And on one of the songs, he played a chord or two and he stopped and he goes, there's no reason to do that song here. Let's do this song instead. And he was supposed to be doing the song Less Than Zero, and instead he played Radio Radio, which is a very, very good song, and it made a lot of sense then. But of course, it ticked off Lorne Michaels to the point where Lorne Michaels said, you'll never work in American television again. Now, he did work in American television again, and the two have made up because he has since appeared on Saturday Night Live again. But Less Than Zero. And then he played a bunch of songs I'm not that familiar with. We're All Cowards Now, Waiting for the End of the World. I know that song. No Flag. But then Opportunity off of Get Happy. Little Triggers, Lover's Walk. And then song number 12, Man Out of Time. And I was so happy that he did that song. And I'm like, yes, the stars are aligning. Everything's coming together. And interestingly, a lot of the songs he did last night were arranged a little differently. And so on the album and some other versions I've seen him perform of Man at a Time, he's got a longer intro, kind of chopped that off and just went straight into the song. But the interesting thing about Elvis Costello and his band is they would often just run these songs together. So they'd do a song, and before you even had a chance to realize it was over, they're into the next song. And one of the reasons they did that is they played 27 songs. 27 songs. Not all of them are long songs, but again, halfway through the set, Man Out of Time. 13, Shipbuilding, which came out shortly after Imperial Bedroom, but it was a well-known song of his. The Greatest Love, a later song. He did a couple covers, Why Don't You Love Me by Hank Williams. And Elvis Costello is known as having a real love for a variety of kinds of music, not just the rock and roll, but also some jazzy stuff. He did a whole bunch of songs where he collaborated with Burt Bacharach, which, of course, is the exact opposite of what most teenage punks were thinking in 1977. Indoor Fireworks, Deportee, Face in the Crowd, Clubland, and then, of course, number 21, Radio Radio. And the place went insane, and he transitioned straight from that into Pump It Up. And in fact, from Radio Radio and beyond, the audience was on its feet. I skipped over by accident Every Day I Write the Book, which was, like I said, right outside of what I consider to be his prime time. I Can't Stand Up for Falling Down off of Get Happy. Allison, one of his earlier songs, audience singing along with a ballad. And What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. And then, according to this, he closed it out New Amsterdam. But what's funny is somebody else had listed a different song. And I'll be honest, I didn't recognize the song he ended with. Because every other show he had done, he had ended with What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. But it was an amazing show. And I don't think the band was quite as tight as it was in 1981 or 82. But he appeared to be enjoying himself. The audience was enjoying it. I thought it was amazing. And one of the things that I'm very worried about as I go see shows now at this point in my life is some of these people that I grew up listening to. I remember buying Elvis Costello records in high school. and talking to my friends about him and reading about him in Rolling Stone magazine and so on. And I can go see him perform like I did last night, but he's 71 years old. And last year I saw Jeff Lynne from ELO at Little Caesars Arena. And a year or two before that, I saw Alan Parsons. And unfortunately, I've read articles recently that Alan Parsons has had health issues. And I know that Jeff Lynne missed a couple of shows in England because he had health issues. And sadly, some artists that I would like to see are no longer around. And that's happening. And so it's really, really cool to me to be able to say that I've seen these different artists. And some of them at the time might not have occurred to me how important it was that I saw them when I did. And on the other hand, other artists, you think, I could go see them, might not go see them. And then what happens if something happens and that opportunity never arises again? And that can happen also. So I mentioned about a month ago, I went and saw Rod Stewart at Pine Knob. And I'll admit, when I was younger, I was not a huge Rod Stewart fan. My older brothers had a few of his old records. I remember hearing Maggie May back when it came out, that kind of thing. But in later years, he went disco. That's how you lost your rock and roll card. You went disco. And then he was doing complete albums of American songbook type covers. And some of them I'm like, some of them, But I went and saw him play. And I was actually surprised at my reaction because I recognized every single song. And to see the guy who performed it doing it made a difference. And the guy had the energy of a 20-year-old, and he's out there, I think he's 80-ish, running around like a youngster, and it's pretty cool to see. And I'm not sure how much longer Rod Stewart will be touring, but I got to see him. So to see Elvis Costello last night was an amazing experience. Like I said, I'm very, very happy because I saw him the two times where I was blown away. The spinning songbook was pretty cool. But then I saw the show where he did all the new stuff, and I'm like, what happened to that angry young rocker? that so enthralled me when I was a teenager. But I saw elements of that last night in the 71-year-old Elvis Costello on stage. And in fact, he introduced the band, and he jokingly said about Charlie Sexton, he said, here's a song I put out probably when he was not even born yet, which isn't quite the case mathematically, but it was pretty close. But like I said, an amazing show, had a great time, and I was especially happy that he did my song, Man Out of Time, off of Imperial Bedroom. So there's the review of the concert. If you're a fan and he's touring near you, go see him. But otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.